All right. Okay, so we are again in section 4, where we are talking about the authority of the king, and everything within this section is designed to demonstrate Jesus's authority to be the king. Now, after this section, we're going to get to the controversy over the king. So now, after he's demonstrated who he is, then it's time for the religious leaders and the crowd to start reacting to that and determine what they think he is. Is he the Messiah or is he not? But we're in the section now where he's doing event after event after event, demonstrating that he is in fact the Messiah, so that there will be a time when it's done where there is a decision time from everybody. And so as part of this section here on the authority of the king, we've been talking about different aspects of that. And we've been talking about his authority, first of all, to preach, to heal, right? His authority over demons and disease. We're going to talk about defilement today, which is disease, but it has a special type of disease. It's a defilement disease. It's an uncleanness of disease. It's not just physical ailment that is the problem tonight. Authority over nature, we talked about that last week. So as we go through these, he's demonstrating that he is in fact the Messiah, right? That's what's going on in this particular section that we are in. So tonight, we're going to talk about his authority over defilement in the healing and the cleansing of the Jewish leper. And then next week, we'll go into his authority to forgive sins. Okay, so if you remember last week, we ended with him performing the miracle where he had his authority over nature. Remember, this is where Jesus he's preaching in the Galilee area. He's walking by the Sea of Galilee, and he gets into Peter's boat to preach. He's there. He preaches about the kingdom, about who he is as the Messiah, and that the kingdom has come. And then he orders Peter to go out in the boat after they've already been out all night. And Peter's like, this is crazy. We don't do fishing in the day. We're already done. We caught nothing. And of course, he tells them to put in his nets. They pull out so much fish that they have to call in James and John. They bring their boat out, and both boats are filled to the point where they start to sink. And then at that point, we have the calling of James, right? So now he's added the 6th person to his group of disciples. So they are at the Sea of Galilee area, and right around the Sea of Galilee, there are these mountains and these hills. So right after that event, he and his 6 disciples go up into the mountains to do whatever. We're not really told, but they end up heading from the Sea of Galilee right up into the hillside, somewhere shortly from where they were at. And then this is where the next part of this takes place, right? So I'm going to read primarily from Mark, but again, I've highlighted the differences between the synoptic gospel accounts in yellow. So that will be some of the additional information that Mark doesn't provide. So in Mark chapter 1, verse 40 through 45, it says this, "And a leper came to him, imploring him, and kneeling said to him, 'If you will, you can make me clean.' Moved with pity, he stretched out his hand and touched him and said to him, 'I will be clean.' And immediately the leprosy left him, and he was made clean. And Jesus sternly charged him and sent him away at once, and said to him, 'See that you say nothing to anyone, but go, show yourself to the priest, and offer for your cleansing what Moses commanded for a proof to them.' But he went out and began to talk freely about it, and to spread the news, so that Jesus could no longer openly enter a town, but was out in desolate places, and people were coming to him from every quarter." Right? So we get this incredible event here of the healing of the Jewish leper. Now, what we have here from from Matthew's account is it says, when he came down from the mountain, great crowds followed him. So after he's gotten his disciples to the Sea of Galilee, they apparently go up into the hillsides that are right there. And as he's coming down, great crowds are following him. Well, they're following him because he just created all these fish. And he's called the disciples, and they head up in the mountains. Guess what? The crowds, they just leave, and they follow him right up there in the mountains. So then as they're up in the mountains, then they come down, and the great crowds follow them back down to the Sea of Galilee. And we get this leper that then approaches Christ. Now, Luke says that while he was in one of the cities, so in other words, Matthew says they came down from the mountain. Luke then says that in one of the cities, probably Capernaum, but perhaps one of the other ones that are around there, While they're in the city, that's where this Jewish leper meets him. The other thing that Luke adds, and of course, Luke being a doctor as well as a historian, he adds that it wasn't just that the man had leprosy or was a leper, but that he was full of leprosy, right? So he's going to add that additional detail that this leprosy is in its very advanced stages for this individual. We'll talk about what that looks like here in just a moment. But we also have the addition that Luke says that he fell on his face and he begged him, right? And we're going to talk a little bit about that right there. He begs him, he implores him that he says, Lord, if you can, make me clean. So Luke adds the fact that he addresses him as Lord. Now, Lord is kyrios, and in this case, it definitely means at least sir, right, in a very respectful tone to someone like, well, you could say sir, and it could perhaps mean something additional for this particular individual. But he calls him Lord, recognizing his respect towards Christ. And then what he adds down here in Luke, he says that the crowds, because this leper goes out and spreads the word so that Jesus could no longer, he couldn't go into towns anymore. If he went into towns, he'd be trampled to death probably. I mean, he's going to be just thronged to death. So he can't go out there. He goes out into these desolate places. And it says not only that the crowds came to him from every quarter, as Mark says, but that they came to hear him and to be healed of their infirmities. Well, for good reason, because the miracle he does here, if he can do this miracle, he can do anything. Like, this miracle is unique in the ministry of Christ. There's 3 unique miracles that he does that absolutely point to him being the Messiah, and this is the first one of them. And so once he does this, there's no escape in the crowds. Everybody who's sick or has an issue is coming to Christ to be healed. That's the type of impact that this particular miracle has, right? And it also says, in addition to them doing that he would withdraw to desolate places and pray, right? So he's out there not only healing, but he's praying to the Father. And I won't tell you exactly why necessarily, because we're going to cover that in the next little bit, but he's definitely praying about what's going to come next. He knows what's coming next, and what's coming next is not good, right? So the happy party that everyone's throwing for Jesus, that everyone loves Jesus, all of a sudden that party's going to come crashing down really, really soon, right? So he's praying because he knows the next steps in his ministry are going to become really difficult. They've been great so far. Everyone's applauding him, putting him on his shoulders, marching him around, and it's going to become difficult. So he needs to pray in order to understand what to do next, and understand and to get the strength to be able to go through and do the things that God requires him, knowing it's going to become tough. All right. So that's our story that we have. Now, if we break it down, let's talk first about the situation. Like I said, he came down from the mountain, great crowds followed him, and he was in one of the cities. Now, this is the first healing that's recorded in the Gospel of Matthew. So, we're already into Matthew chapter 4, and we don't have anything recorded there other than this one here. So this is the first healing, not the first miracle, but the first healing that's recorded in Matthew. So Matthew thought this was significant enough. And in fact, it is significant enough, because this particular healing is going to prove that he's in fact the Messiah. And remember, Matthew's theme is what? Jesus the Messiah, the what? The King of the Jews, right? So Matthew's going to record this because this healing demonstrates that Jesus is in fact the Messiah, the King of the Jews that was promised by the Old Testament prophets. So it's important that he records this particular healing, which is probably why this is the first one he records, right? So it's the first one in Matthew, right? Now, Luke states that the man just didn't have leprosy, but he was full of leprosy. In other words, leprosy had engulfed his entire body. It had basically gotten to the point of consuming the gentleman. This man was on the point of death. He wasn't just starting with this. This guy was on death's door, and his last hope was going to be Christ, right? So he's full of leprosy in those final stages. Now, one of the things that's interesting, of course, is that the man approaches Christ, which was against all the rules. all the rules and all the regulations. We'll get into what some of those are here in just a moment, right? But the lepers were not allowed to be in society. They weren't allowed to come and approach that. There's consequences, which we'll talk about, that this person could have done. So his boldness in coming to Christ, knowing that he's prohibited from doing that, demonstrates his faith. He's willing to do whatever it takes in order to be healed. So he's going to do whatever it takes. So his boldness is something that we need to keep in mind. And it's really that boldness that we should have coming to Christ as well, right? He demonstrates the type of faith that we should all demonstrate in our relationship with Christ. Now, again, someone that had leprosy was prohibited from being within society. There was a strict segregation. And of course, you can read the Levitical laws around leprosy, Leviticus 13 and Leviticus 14. So if you want to go back and look at it, if you had leprosy, you were considered dead. Your life, you were as if you were a dead person. Society considered you dead, and you probably felt as if you were dead. Like it was this extreme, not just sickness, but sickness that included this segregation from society and from mankind. And Leviticus chapter 13 paints this as leprosy is not just the physical ailment. Like a lot of other things are just physical ailments, but leprosy had this special connotation to it, in that it made you unclean, right? Like you could be blind, and I could come up and touch you as a blind person if you're blind, and I could lead you by the hand. I'm not unclean, no big deal, right? You could be lame, and I could come and grab you by the hand, no big deal. But leprosy was one that included this connotation of not just physical illness, but being unclean, so that they couldn't participate in temple worship. They couldn't participate in fact, they weren't even allowed in the city of Jerusalem at all, right? They weren't allowed inside the cities. And if someone touched them, that person would become ceremonially unclean themselves, right? So there's this stigma that's added to the physical ailment, right? So I'm going to start wanting to sort of put yourself in the place of this leper and the dire situation that this individual is in, right? So keep that in mind. Leprosy, both a physical ailment, but also a religious, spiritual uncleanness that is added on top of that. Okay.
Does that mean sin?
No, it does not mean sin. What it means to be unclean is that it means that you're not able to participate in the religious activities. So in other words, you couldn't go into the temple. So for instance, a woman, when she gives birth, she's unclean for a certain number of days, depending on if it's boy or girl. That doesn't mean she sinned at all. It just means that she is now separated out and not allowed to participate in the religious services, in the temple activities, until that uncleanness is removed, which of course Mary had to do that, and it's of no sin. So this uncleanness isn't necessarily representing sin, but it does mean that the person is not allowed to participate in that. So this person had no ability to have any form of spiritual connection, barred from any kind of spiritual connection, not just from society, but from God himself. So the distance someone would feel that had leprosy, the loneliness and the desolation that this person would feel is almost unimaginable, right? So we have this picture here of that. Now, leprosy included different various skin diseases, but the leprosy that is referred to here, and that's referred to in the biblical accounts when it refers to people, is what's called Hansen's bacillus, which is just it's a bacterial disease that, and we'll describe what that looks like, but it starts, it spreads throughout the body, right? So this leprosy is going to be incredibly difficult for the individual to manage. Now, here's the description of leprosy, and sort of, and I don't mean to gross anybody else. If you've just have eaten dinner or you eat yourself a nice little Cold Stone ice cream, sorry about that. But let me just describe this to you, because I want you to stop for just a moment. I want you to put yourself in the shoes of this particular individual and imagine what is going on and what this person has endured. And there's no cure for it. There's nothing anybody can do for it. There's no chance of being healed. Zero chance. And yet this individual takes the step of faith to approach Christ, knowing Christ can heal him, even though there's no possibility of him being healed, right? But think of what this man has had to deal with for, in this case, likely 10 years or perhaps longer, right? Because it's a very slow working disease, but it's progressive and it just gets nastier and nastier the longer that you have it, right? So this is what it says. It says, in the Mosaic law, the issue of leprosy received a very special treatment. In fact, you got a couple chapters devoted just to leprosy, right? The key Hebrew word Moses used for leprosy is tazarat, which literally means a mark or stroke. The basic meaning of tazarat is infectious skin disease or become diseased on the surface of the skin. It is a generic term which is used to describe all sorts of dermatological diseases of humans, but also applies to mildew on fabrics and mineral compositions on stone walls. Concerning human skin ailments, the meaning of the term includes the traditional understanding of leprosy, such as Hansen's disease and elephantiasis, as well as other dermatological problems. The leprosy mentioned in the Gospels would refer to Hansen's disease, which is caused by bacterial infection. In the vast majority of cases, the initial symptom is numbness in the fingers and toes, and if left untreated, the disease slowly progresses to the next stages. Yellowish lesions develop deep in the skin on the genitalia, face, forehead, and joints. The hair growing in the affected areas assumes the same color as the lesions, and as the disease progresses so slowly, it can take up to 10 years for the microorganisms to eventually penetrate through the cellular tissue and reach the muscles and bones. Hair begins to turn white, woolly, and eventually falls out. There is gelatinous swelling that forms in the cellular tissue. As time progresses, the skin becomes hard, rough, and seamy. Large scabs form which fall off from time to time, exposing running sores. The nails swell, curl up, and fall off. There is a loss of mucous membrane, resulting in constant bleeding gums. The nose is stuffed, and there is a constant flow of saliva. Because the bacteria attack the nerves, the senses become dull. In the last stages of leprosy, the victim experiences extreme weight loss and becomes very weak, suffering from chronic diarrhea, chronic thirst, and a burning fever. Finally, there is an attack on the internal and vital organs, leading to death. The leper in this account has entered into the final stages of the disease, and we know this because Luke again observes something the other Gospels do not. The man was full of leprosy. So just imagine this. Man, you've got painful lesions and scabs and bleeding. You're just drooling all the time. Your hair is falling out. I mean, your body is literally being eaten up, right? And then everything that you would imagine would happen when your skin starts to deteriorate around you. And then what happens to the internal organs? So extremely painful, uncomfortable death. And of course, you can understand why people wouldn't want to get close to someone who's a leper. No one wants that. Like, I don't want to die at all, to be honest with you, but I certainly don't want to die that way. So when you see what happens to someone who has leprosy, you're not going to get a lot of people that want to go help, right? So this is kind of what's going on here with this gentleman. For some reason, not working. Okay. Now, let's just talk a little bit here about leprosy for a second, because the reason why I want to spend some time on this is that this healing is unique. And I'm going to get into why it's unique and why the crowd reacts the way that they do, and why this sets up the situation that we're going to talk about next week, where there starts to be some negativity towards Christ, because this right here is going to point to him as the Messiah, and people have to start making decisions, right? So let's talk a little bit more about leprosy. Now, the Old Testament gives 3 examples of Jews who were stricken by leprosy, right? Now, that doesn't include Naaman, who was the army, the commander-in-chief of the Syrian army. He was a Gentile, right? So he's the Gentile that we know of that was struck with leprosy, and of course was healed by Elisha. The 3, though, that we get of Jews. Now, again, the reason why I'm pointing out Jews is because this is a special judgment upon God on particularly the Jewish people for specific types of sin, that the start of leprosy started because of a very specific sin in the Jewish history. So this is really important to understand that this is a Jewish leper that's healed, not a Gentile leper, right? Because that makes all the difference in the world in this particular situation. So the three Jews stricken by leprosy, the first one, of course, we know of is Miriam, right? Because she spoke out against Moses and against his leadership, and God strikes her with leprosy, right? So she has to go outside the camp and suffer all that until she, again, God, in this case, heals her and makes her clean. No one heals her. God is the one that does the healing, right? And the rabbis claim that she was punished so harshly. Like, why did God strike her with leprosy? I mean, he could have done a lot of other stuff, but of course, leprosy is like the worst thing. Like, no one wants to be struck with leprosy. So why was God so harsh on Miriam? He said, the rabbis taught this. It was in order that all might know the penalty of slander, and that if people were tempted to speak slander, they might reflect what happened to Miriam. And of course, that is the Jewish rabbinic writing, the Midrash Rabbah. So because she had spoken slander against Moses, who was God's representative, that was basically speaking slander against God. And so God said, I'm going to give you an example of what happens to people who speak slander against me and speak ill of me, right? And so that's the rabbinic reason for why God was so harsh against Miriam. All right, the second Jew that we have that was struck with leprosy was Uzziah the king, right? We have that in 2 Kings chapter 15 and 2 Chronicles chapter 26. And if you remember correctly, Uzziah elevates himself. Now, again, Uzziah was a godly man, godly king, good king, Uzziah. But he has this, he makes a mistake where he decides to exalt himself, and he goes into the temple and he decides to offer incense that's only to be offered by the priest, right? So he takes on a role that he is not allowed to take on. He's forbidden to do. And because he does this, God strikes him with leprosy, right? And he's forced to leave Jerusalem. And in fact, he ends his rule, and there's a co-reign with him and his son at the last part of his life, because he's suffering now as king away from everybody as a leper until he dies of leprosy, right? So, yeah, so Uzziah, the good king, God says, sorry, Uzziah, that's not allowed. And God strikes him with that. So that's the second Jew that we have from the biblical accounts that has leprosy. And then we have, the third one was Gehazi. Remember, that's the servant of Elisha the prophet. Remember, Naaman, the Syrian commander-in-chief, has leprosy. And he comes to Elisha, and Elisha tells him, hey, go wash in the river and everything else. And Naaman's like, that's not going to work. He's, calling on his bluff, but he ends up doing it, right? And Naaman comes back, and he's healed. And then he wants to offer a gift, right? He wants to offer a gift. And what does Elisha say? What does he say? I don't need your gift. But Gehazi, the servant of Elisha, is like, "Whoa, man, that's a lot of money. That's a lot of stuff, right?" And so he gets greedy, and behind Elisha's back, he runs off to Naaman, and he lies. Hey, my master wants the reward. The reward, he wants it. And so Naaman's like, great, fine, you healed me of leprosy, whatever else, gives him the stuff, and he comes back, and he's approached by Elisha the prophet saying, what did you do? Did you do it? No. Here we got, he's lying about taking the gift and everything else. And because of that, boom, he's struck with leprosy. Okay. And ends up dying. He doesn't get healed. Leprosy takes him. And what the Jewish writer says, it says this is Rabbi Simeon ben Eliezer says, so too on them that speak slander plagues come. For thus we find concerning Gehazi that he told a lying tale about his master, and leprosy clove to him until the day of his death. Okay, so we've got these three Jews recorded in biblical history that have been struck with leprosy because of, particularly because of either some sort of a slanderous action, or taking, again, self-glorification in this case of Uzziah against what God has commanded him not to do. Now, the rabbis added two more. Now, the reason why I say not biblically endorsed, because one of them doesn't have any biblical support for it at all, although they came up with support for it. And another one is just a reference to an individual, which they take to be Shebna, and they take that to mean that even though it doesn't say he had leprosy, because of what it said, they identified him as being leprous as well. So we've got Shebna, who is the servant of King Hezekiah. And you can read about this account in Isaiah chapter 22 and Isaiah chapter 37, if you want. And what the rabbi said is that God smote Shebna with leprosy because he stole from the temple, right? He used his high position as the servant of the king and went and sort of embezzled from the temple and took some stuff. And so because of him stealing this temple property, that's why God smote him with that. And of course, the rabbis in their writings said that it was Shebna's arrogance and embezzling the temple property that was the reason why he was stricken with leprosy and chased away like a bird, because lepers were isolated from society. So it's the chased away like a bird that led the rabbis to believe that what God struck him with was leprosy as a result of that particular incident. Right, and then the fifth one that we have here, again, this one is not biblically supported, but the rabbis did come up with it, and they came up with a really cool reason why they believe that King David had leprosy, right? And the reason for that is that there's two different accountings of David's rule, and one of them leaves out 6 months worth of his rule. And so they said, well, the reason why that was left out in one of the biblical accounts is because that 6 months he was dealing with leprosy. So God smote him with leprosy, and then God healed him. He wasn't healed by anybody else, but God took that away. And so it says, Rabbi Judah said in Rob's name, 6 months was David smitten with leprosy. The Shekinah deserted him, and the Sanhedrin held aloof from him. How do we know that it was for 6 months? Because it is written, and the days that David reigned over Israel were 40 years. 7 years reigned he in Hebron, and 33 years reigned he in Jerusalem. Whilst elsewhere is written, again, this is the second biblical account, in Hebron reigned he over Judah 7 years and 6 months. So in other words, one account says it was 7 years, one account says 7 years and 6 months. Thus, the 6 months are not counted in the first passage quoted, proving that he was smitten with leprosy. So this is kind of the background to this issue of leprosy. And again, it's Jewish leprosy that we're concerned about here, because this is going to play a key role in the reaction of the people to this miracle. Okay.
So what's really different about those accounts is you said that they were smitten by God, so
yeah,
there was a consequence for their behavior.
Yes. Yes.
So they were smitten.
Yes.
With leprosy. Is that a form of punishment?
Yes.
But is that the same situation with the Jew that Jesus?
Well,
or is that different?
Well, no, that's so let me answer that by what I have here on the slide. Again, I'm painting the context for when the people saw Jesus heal the leper, what would they have been thinking? So I'm trying to build the context for you to think as a first century Jew and look at this healing from their perspective, because we look at it as just it's another healing. Like Jesus heals a blind man, he heals a lady that has the issue of blood. I mean, he heals a lot of people, like a lame man, whatever else. We just look at it as just another healing. They would have looked at it as very unique. So I'm trying to paint and provide the Jewish background to this healing that will help you to understand why the crowds, why the reaction was is they crowded on him so much he couldn't even go into a town anymore, right? It was so bad. Okay, so what the rabbis, and again, this is the Jewish teaching, what the rabbis concluded from the biblical history is that leprosy was a direct result of judgment from God, right? For a particularly heinous sin. So while you could have some other physical ailment that may not be related to sin, Leprosy was because of self-caused sin, and particularly heinous types of sin. So let me just read to you a few things from the rabbinic writings. Again, I'm trying to provide you the context that the people would have understood from the teaching of their religious leaders, what someone with leprosy, why they would have gotten that particular disease. All right, so quoting from the Midrash Sifri on Numbers, it says this: Rabbi Jose, the Galilean, says, "Come, see the terrible effect of sin. Before they, the Israelites, committed the crime of the golden calf, there was among them no person with an issue, no leper, but as soon as they sinned, these diseases sprang up in their midst." So the rabbinic teaching was, hey, look, before this time, there weren't any lepers there in Israel. There wasn't no Jewish lepers, no Jewish people that suffered from the issue of blood, like this lady did. Like, nothing happened. But as soon as they committed that sin of the golden calf, all of a sudden God said, that's it, I'm done. And now the Jews become plagued with these types of diseases from that point forward, right? So that's kind of the reason for them looking at this issue with this type of a lens. In the Midrash Rabbah, in the Song of Songs, it says this: when Israel stood before Mount Sinai and promised obedience in Exodus 24:7, at that moment there were among them neither persons with issue, nor lepers, nor lame, nor blind, no dumb and no deaf, no lunatics and no imbeciles, no dullards and no doubters. However, this changed the moment the people broke the first law, and then the order was given, let them put out of camp every leper and every one that hath an issue. All right, so again, that's where the rabbis came to this idea that leprosy started because of this original sin, the golden calf. And then anyone who has leprosy, God is the one delivering that judgment upon them, and is a punishment, that they deserve for particularly heinous crimes and activity and sins. So this gentleman who's coming to Christ to be saved, imagine what the religious leaders would have thought. What would have their attitude been to them if they'd seen him off in the distance? Would they have thought about him? Would they have shown him pity or compassion?
Probably not.
No, they would have said, look what that guy gets. He gets what he deserves. That's God. God, do it. Do it, God. You do it to him, right? That guy deserves what he deserves. And yet we're going to find out that Christ approaches it with compassion and with this pity and with this love, right? So
At Mount Sinai, was that where at the time the 10 Commandments were?
yes.
Okay.
So remember what happened is Israel comes out of Egyptian captivity, and God signs his covenant with them. Remember, this is God, the constitution that God signs with Israel as his people. Before they were Jews, and then at Mount Sinai, he calls them his people, and they become the nation of Israel. And on Mount Sinai, all the 613 laws that are given to Moses become the constitution that Israel abides by as part of God's people. So when they agree to God to obey all of the 613 laws as his people, that's what happened in Mount Sinai. But also remember, when Moses goes up on Mount Sinai, he's up there for 40 days, and they start to think, well, maybe Moses is dead. Maybe he got eaten by something or fell down a cliff. I don't know what happened to Moses, but guess what? We're going to worship the gods that brought us out of Egypt, and they make the what? The golden calf. And they said, this is the God, Aaron says, this is the God that led us out of Egypt. So it's that situation that then the rabbis looked back and said, hey, we wouldn't have leprosy if it wasn't for the sins that happened at Mount Sinai. So anyone who has leprosy is guilty of some egregious sin in their life, and they're getting what they deserve, right?
So if you didn't have leprosy, were you considered to be spotless or sinless?
No. But just leprosy was a particularly egregious illness to have, because it wasn't just, you could be a cripple and people might look at you and maybe wonder what you did, or maybe God's punishing you, whatever else. But definitely, if you had leprosy, you got leprosy because you've sinned. You're a particularly evil person, which is why God smote you with leprosy, right? So it's got these connotations associated with it. And we see, though, when he comes to Christ, we see Christ has a completely different view on that individual. What society has outcast and decides is not worth anything, is only getting what they deserve. Christ says, no, 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 that's not it. That's not it, right? And that's going to be the part that we want to focus on coming up here. All right. So again, the rabbis taught that it was self-caused, right? And what Arnold Fruchtenbaum says, he says, as a result, the rabbis viewed leprosy as something that could not be healed, for man could not overturn God's decision. Now, this is important to remember. There is no record in the biblical record or Jewish history, the rabbinic writings included, of any Jew being healed from leprosy. Now, you might say, what about Miriam? She was smote with leprosy, and God healed her before the giving of the law. Okay, before the law was completely given. So she was kind of before that. So once the law was given, and a part of the law contained what to do if someone had leprosy and what to do if someone was healed of leprosy, from the giving of those instructions in the law, there's no record of a Jew being healed. We've got a record of a Gentile being healed, Naaman. We've got no record of a Jew. So for 1,500 years in Jewish history, no one's been healed of leprosy if you're a Jew. Does that all make sense? So
then you're at this, you're in this place where Jesus is encountering this leper, and you're a Jew, and there's no way that this guy is going to get healed.
no, and the reason for it, we'll get into this just a little bit more. The reason for it is that because this was God's specific judgment, and because we've got no record of anyone being healed, the belief came to be that it's impossible to be healed from leprosy. Like, people have been raised from the dead. Like, we've got biblical accounts of people being raised from. It was more likely to raise someone from the dead than it was that a leper would get healed. So in other words, leprosy wasn't curable because it was God's divine judgment, and it's irrevocable. There's nothing you can do because God said this is your judgment and that's it. So the rabbis, they didn't even have a cure for it. Right? So I'm going to get into it a little bit later. So hopefully, as you start to understand here, the reaction to the crowd now, this isn't just a healing. This is a very, very specific one that's going to point to the messiahship of Jesus Christ. Okay? So again, Fruchtenbaum says, as a result, the rabbis viewed leprosy as something that could not be healed, for man could not overturn God's decision. Therefore, there was nothing that could be done for this particular individual. Now, let me just talk about the consequences of leprosy for the leper before we get into the encounter then with Christ, right? Because that's the part I really want to focus on. But I need you to understand the gravity of the situation and the incredible nature of this miracle that Christ performs, right? So the consequences for the leper, right? First of all, the only person that could declare someone a leper was a priest, right? So you and I could, and if we're not priests, we couldn't do it. But if someone had the spots, the signs of leprosy, they would go to the priest would have to examine it. And if the priest said, yes, that is in fact leprosy, then they would be considered a leper and they would be cast out, right? And there's an official record of that designation of someone as a leper. So keep that in mind, right? This man has had it recorded in the temple records that he was declared a leper by a priest at some point in his life, okay? Which is going to be important to what Christ commands him to do once he's been healed, all right? Everyone still with me? We're all good? All right. Okay, so some of the consequences. The first thing is that they'd have to tear their clothing, right? So if you're declared a leper, you would have to tear your clothing. You'd have to wear torn clothing your entire life. You couldn't, tear, for a little bit and then go put some new stuff on, because torn clothing in the Old Testament represented mourning. And typically, or very often, the type of mourning is mourning of death. When someone has died, you would go and you would tear your clothes and you would sit in mourning. Right. So this requirement that they walk around in torn clothes represents this idea of mourning, and it's the mourning of life, that they are considered dead to society. Just imagine the stigma of having to do that, right? Of walking around in these torn clothes. And what it says in Leviticus 13, this is just a small part of Leviticus 13 and 14 that talks about leprosy. So if you're interested in this topic, go back and read those two chapters. It says in verse 45, the leprous person who has the disease shall wear torn clothes and let the hair of his head hang loose. And he shall cover his upper lip and cry out, unclean, unclean. He shall remain unclean as long as he has the disease. He is unclean. He shall live alone. His dwelling shall be outside the camp. Right? So that's the first thing, is he's got to tear his clothes, right? Second thing that happens is he's got to have a facial covering. Now, I just want you to think about this for a second. The torn clothes would represent that this person's dead to society, right? He's in mourning, this person's dead. The second thing he's got to do, though, is wear a facial covering. Why a facial covering? Right? Well, they didn't know about the spreading of disease back then, too. So it wouldn't have been, it's not the mask. We shouldn't think of mask mandates. But typically, this is the first part of the face that it would show up on fingers and faces. But what this does, imagine walking around now, and what you have is you can see this person's eyes. That's all you can see. Eyes and a forehead, but you can't see the face. What does the face represent to someone? Like, I can tell the difference between the three of you primarily because of what? Your face. Like, you can show me a couple arms and I might be able to, I don't know if you got a tattoo or whatever else I can maybe do that. But I reckon we recognize people by their face. This person has to have a covering all the way up past their nose. So it's almost unidentifiable as an individual and as a human. So there is a dehumanization that happens with the wearing of the covering above the nose. This person no longer human. It's no longer recognizable, right? Pretty intense what's going on when you have this disease of leprosy, right? The other thing is that he has to, if he comes close to anybody, they weren't allowed in towns, in any walled towns, right? And they weren't allowed within a certain number of feet, and we'll get into that here in just a moment, of anybody. But if they saw somebody coming, they would have to yell out, unclean, unclean. Okay? Now, of course, that's a warning to the person immediately that this person's a leper. That's the reason why you say unclean and clean. That means that this person's a leper. So it's to warn the other individual. But notice what they don't yell out. He doesn't yell out, I'm sick, or I'm sick, or I've got a disease, I've got a disease. What is the thing they call out? They say, I am unclean. Think about the difference between just naming that you have an ailment and naming yourself as someone who is unclean. That's different. Like I said, I could touch someone who was lame and lift them up and carry them around, and I wouldn't be unclean, and neither would they be unclean. This is one of the diseases that makes the person unclean. So they're identifying themselves not as someone who has a physical ailment, but someone who is not worthy to be touched. Someone who's not worthy of human interaction, of human touch, of human compassion. They're naming themselves by the result of the disease, but not by the disease. That's way worse. Does that make sense? So there's an intensity of issues this person has to deal with as a leper. I want you to feel the isolation and the sense of complete despair because of how society views them and how they have to identify themselves. What an incredibly difficult situation for this person to be in, to not feel loved and accepted by anybody because of this particular disease, right?
So can I say something, Catholic?
You can say whatever you want, Rich, as long as it's not politics.
No, it's not politics. But what you described there, Randall, is exactly what I have experienced with my son Joseph.
Yeah.
Who feels the same way about himself.
Mm-hmm.
And the thing about him as a homeless drug addict on the street, is that he's part of a community that I would say feels the same way, that they are unclean, unwanted, and unloved. And there's nothing that seemingly that can help them, and society has the mindset that this is something that they brought about themselves, and there's some truth to that, and that they got what they deserved. I mean, it's a very similar situation.
Yeah.
I mean, it's really kind of, I don't know. It's kind of, well, it makes it kind of personal, actually, but anyhow.
No, and here's the thing, whether someone got themselves into the situation or not, there still needs to be compassion. We don't know. Perhaps this person did do something that God smote him with leprosy. It's possible. But what we notice is that Christ's reaction doesn't have anything to do with how they got themselves into the situation, whether it was their own means or not. There's a compassion for the individual.
Did he even say anything?
After the leper asked him to heal him, Christ heals him, right? So we'll see that interaction here in a moment. Yeah, whether or not it's someone who's on drugs, out on the street, a prostitute, the drunkard, it actually doesn't really matter. What matters is that our view, sometimes we can get wrapped around an axle. I'm the same way. I can look at someone and be like, you know what? You got yourself into it, and you got to kind of, I mean, we've all had some thoughts about that. And there's some truth to personal accountability, right? It's just some truth to personal accountability that some people have gotten themselves in the jams because of decisions that they've made. But our response to them still must be first and foremost that we are to love them to Christ, right? That's what Christ does, right? So if our first response, and I am guilty of this I'm definitely have been guilty of this. If my first response is to think about why that person is in the spot they're in and all the horrible things they've done, and I guess that's just what happens when you're that type of person. And that's the first response, not that person needs Christ, then there's something messed up with me in my theology, in how I'm viewing the individual. Now, that doesn't mean that after there's compassion and you're trying to help the individual that we don't then focus on accountability. Does everyone understand what I'm saying? I'm not saying we don't hold people accountable for stuff, but the love for the person has to come before we want to hold them accountable for that. Because if you want to hold them accountable for those types of things, you'll never love them. Does that make sense to anybody? I don't know.
Well, what's interesting is that leprosy is a disease, right?
It is.
And so the rabbis believed that this was something that they got. I mean, we just took us through examples of where
they believe
God smote
yes,
them with leprosy
because of their sin.
Because of their sin.
Yep.
But this individual here, was that a person who just suffered from the disease?
We don't know.
Okay.
So here's what I'm saying. The rabbinic view was it was caused because of sin. I'm not saying that's the biblical view.
Right.
I'm saying the rabbis looked at the accounts of leprosy in the Bible and made the conclusion that was a special judgment, a divine judgment of God upon the individual for specific heinous sins.
Yeah.
So that was the rabbinic theology. That's what the people in the time of Christ would have adopted and have thought of that individual. I'm saying that that's not what the Bible says. And what I'm trying to point out here is that when we put ourselves in this individual's shoes, this is hopeless because society hasn't given you any hope at all. They've discarded you, kicked you to the curb. They don't love you. They don't care about you. regardless of whether, and this is what I'm going to say, regardless of how this individual got himself in the situation, whether it was God's divine judgment or whether it just happened to be because of human frailty. We don't know, but we'll see what Christ's response is, and our actions and attitudes need to follow Christ. And when they don't follow him, and I'm guilty of this more times than I'd like to admit, of first judging the individual for how they got into the situation versus loving them first and then helping them to become accountable for how their life works out in the future. Those are different, right? So that's all I'm talking about, is what is our theological perspective on this type of an issue. All right. I won't continue going on down that road. But anyway, I think I've made at least my perspective clear. Do you want to add something? Oh, okay. All right. So again, we're looking at consequences of leprosy: the tearing the clothing, the facial covering, the uncleanness, and then of course the exclusion from society. They were to live alone. Now they did end up forming like these leper colonies or special parts of that. No one prohibited from doing that, but technically, according to the Mosaic law, they were to live in solitary. They were to live solitary. They weren't to be with anybody, right? That was part of what would happen. So they would be excluded from that, live in special parts of the city. Here's what I want you to kind of see here is the being cut off from society not only meant that they couldn't interact with people, but they couldn't also interact with the religious activities. In other words, they were cut off from the temple. They were cut off from sacrifice. You can't offer sacrifices unless you offer them at the temple. So they can't even offer sacrifices for sin. They literally are cut off from everything, from God and from society. Okay. Now, this is what the rabbis wrote in Zebahim, which is one of the rabbinic writings. It says this: 3 camps of lessening degrees of sanctity were recognized in the wilderness. 1, the camp of the divine presence, the tabernacle. 2, the camp of the Levites, literally the Levitical camp, which immediately surrounded the tabernacle. And 3, the camp of the Israelites, likewise, literally each tribe within the camp of his standard. And that is from Numbers 2. To these 3 correspond the Temple Mount, and the city of Jerusalem, respectively. A leper was expelled from all 3. All right, they're totally excluded from Jerusalem and anything that had to do with Jerusalem. Now, here's the other thing. It wasn't just that you couldn't have contact, but think about what the rabbi said about how far. You think COVID was restrictive? You think he had issues with the 6 feet little thing and, standing in a line or whatever else? That anyone had any issues with that? Here's what they said in relationship to a leper, right? Like COVID has nothing on leprosy. It says, Rabbi Yohanan said, it is prohibited to go 4 cubits, which is anywhere between 6 to 7 feet, depending on whether or not that's 18 inches or 21 inches, right? Typically, a cubit is from your elbow to the tip of your longest finger, right? So somewhere 18 to 21 inches. So you're prohibited to go within 6 to 7 feet to the east of a leper, right? Rabbi Simeon ben Lachish said even 100 cubits, right? So this rabbi says you can't go within 150 feet or 175 feet. That's a long ways. 150 feet is quite a ways that you have to avoid a leper, right? And he says they did not really differ. In other words, the 6 feet to the 150 feet, they did not really differ. The one which said 4 cubits referred to a time when there was no wind blowing, whereas the one who said not even 100 cubits referred to a time when the wind is blowing. So look, if there's no wind outside, you got to be at least 6, 7 feet away. But man, if there's a wind blowing, that leper better stay 150, 175 feet away, because if you get too close and the wind's blowing, you're going to be unclean, right? So again, the ostracizing of these people from society, and how people would have literally been physically repelled back from them if they saw a leper coming and try to get as far away from them. Just imagine you walking down the street and everybody you see scatters as fast as they can. How you're going to feel as a leper, right? Now, if a leper disobeyed these laws, they were beaten with 40 stripes or 40 lashes, right? Now, that's a lot, because the rabbi said 40 lashes was enough to kill a man, which is usually why they got 39 lashes, right? so that you would beat someone, but beat someone within a hair's breadth of death, right? You still wanted to survive, but you wanted to beat them. These lepers would get 40 stripes, which would likely lead to their death if they broke any of these laws, right? So very strict about how that would work, okay? And the last thing that we have here, there's a consequence of leprosy, is that they were considered dead. Even though the lepers living, society would have considered them dead. Now that includes your relatives and your friends. You got no relatives. You've got no friends. You don't have anyone that has any compassion on you. You're literally considered dead to me. That phrase, "you're dead to me," that's what this is talking about here. Okay, so again, the rabbinic writings say this. It says, 4 are accounted as dead: a poor man, a leper, a blind person, and one who is childless. A poor man, as it is written, for all the men are dead which sought thy life. A leper, as it is written, and Aaron looked upon Miriam, and behold, she was leprous. And Aaron said to Moses, let her not be as one dead. The blind, as it is written, he has set me in dark places, as they that be dead of old. And he who is childless, as it is written, give me children, or else I'm dead. So they're quoting different parts of the Old Testament and say, anyone who is a leper, a poor person, a blind person, or childless is to be considered as dead, right? And then this is what the rabbinic writings go on to say. It says, perhaps the restoration to life was to fulfill Elijah's blessing, as it is written, let a double portion of thy spirit fall upon me. In other words, a double portion of Elijah's spirit would fall into Elisha. As Rabbi Yohanan has said, he healed the leprosy. This is Elisha. He healed the leprosy of Naaman, leprosy being equivalent to death, as it is written, let her not, I pray, be one as one dead. So they considered a leper to be dead. You're dead to me. No care for these people. You don't care for the dead unless you go out there and maybe put flowers in the grave, but there's no care for them. So get this here, just for a second here. For Jesus to heal the leper would have been equivalent to him restoring him back to life. Not just a broken leg or a leg that's lame, not just eyesight or not just something else, but literally he's given this individual their life back in more ways than one. Not just the physical, stopping the physical progression of what's going on and restoring them to complete physical health, but being not considered dead anymore to society, to family, to friends, and not being considered dead in regards to the religious practices, right? This is what this man is going to experience, restoration to life. Like if you don't understand and feel that excitement, which explains what he does. When he gets healed, man, he totally ignores what Christ tells him. He is so excited, he just ignores it and just goes out and blabs all over the place about what Christ has done, because he's literally been restored back to life. Does that make sense? He is so excited about what Christ has done to him. All right. Here's some sins that they said led to leprosy. Now, the biggest one that the rabbis said led to, and again, not biblical, but this is what the rabbis considered. Slander was the most common, typically slander against God or one of God's appointed people, right? Slander would cause that. Immorality, arrogance, robbery, bloodshed, murder, false oaths, meanness, idolatry, gross indecency, blasphemy, selfishness, and taking on a dignity that is not given to you, right? Trying to puff yourself up and take on something that is not yours. So these are some things that they said, if you had leprosy, you had to have done some one of these. Right, we know you're guilty. We're not maybe sure which one, but you're guilty of one of these things, right? Because you've got leprosy. All right, now, I'm just going to stop, ask if there's any questions before we go into this next little section, because this is going to be important for us to understand before we actually get to the healing. So any questions either online or in the room? All right. Now, why is this healing unique, and why does it explain the reaction of the people? Because we get a different reaction from the people than we have from the other different miracles that are performed. So, again, since the time that the Mosaic Law was completed, no Jewish leper has ever been healed. Okay? So think about this. You've got 2 chapters in Leviticus that are totally devoted to leprosy and devoted to what to do if a Jewish leper is healed, right? They give all these things like, here's what you do. If you've been healed, you go to the priest, and I'm going to get into exactly what that looked like. But they've got these major sections of the law devoted to leprosy. But guess what? For 1,500 years, they haven't been able to use it. Like, it's like having a law on the book for 1,500 years that never gets used. Because no one ever got healed. So the rabbis never had to perform a cleansing, verification, the cleansing and sacrifices for a Jewish leper. And it had never happened until now. Does that make sense? Until now, no Jewish leper had been healed. The priest had never had to go back into the law and be like, let's figure out how to do it. In fact, I imagine the priest might be like, hey, look, man, no one's done this before. Hey, let's get the Torah out here, and let's go to Leviticus 13 and 14. Let's make sure, Rabbi Shmuel, when you look over my shoulder here and make sure that we got this right, because we've never had to do it before, right? You got to get out the owner's manual. No one's done it before. All right.
So leprosy was a death sentence?
Leprosy was a death sentence. If you had leprosy, you died. Because remember, it was a divine judgment by God that was irrevocable. So there wasn't anything you could do. You just died. And because no one had ever been healed, they never had to use the part of the law that told them what to do if a Jewish leper was healed. So you got 1,500 years of this law just sitting there dormant because it's never been used. Okay? That's what's going on. So when you see the crowd react, you'd react the same way, because we've never seen this before, right? We've seen a lot of stuff, but we've never seen this. Okay. Now, again, from a rabbinic perspective, there wasn't any cure. And this is what Fruchtenbaum says. He says, furthermore, although rabbinic writings contain cures for many different diseases, leprosy was simply not mentioned. The feeling was that since leprosy was caused by divine discipline and Jews who contracted the disease, the Jew who contracted the disease was under judgment, and thus there would simply be no possibility of curing him. This background explains why the report of the healing of a Jewish leper was unique and caused the stir that it did. But he, the healed leper, went out and began to publish it much and to spread the matter, insomuch that Yeshua, that's Jesus, could no more openly enter into a city. Well, no kidding. Like, if you'd seen that happen, man, everybody's coming and flocking, right? Because this is so unique. All right. Now, let me give you a little bit of a sneak peek into the future here. But this miracle happens to be the first, right? So there are lots of miracles Jesus performed. 3 of them got a reaction that none of the other ones got, right? And that's because they're uniquely miracles that only God or the Messiah could do, right? That's the reason why they get the reaction they get, is because they're messianic miracles, right? So he's done lots of them, but they don't cause the stir that this one and the 2 other ones that we're going to have coming up here cause, right? And the other thing here is this, is that in the Old Testament, we've got people that did miracles. You got Moses, you've got Elijah, you've got Elisha. They've done these miracles. And think about it. When Jesus created these fish, or the issue of the fish last week that we talked about, with all the fish getting caught in the net, boy, is that amazing. But guess what? It's not the first time in history that someone has shown the ability to have miracles related to nature, right? Think about Moses and the 10 plagues. Turns the Nile to blood. You got frogs coming out. A stick gets turned into a snake. So even though this whole thing is incredible, it's not unique, right? And even though we have the axe head, remember, that floats up, right? That they're chopping down the axe and they're chopping down the trees, and the axe head floats out in the water. The axe head floats up to the top of the water. Guess what? Axe heads don't float on water. So when Jesus walks on water, that's pretty incredible. But guess what? We've seen things like that before. We've seen axe heads float. Just happens to be a person, not an axe head. And what we see here is that although we've got these miracles that have happened by these Old Testament people, no one ever asked the question, gosh, do you think Moses could be the Messiah? Or do you think Elijah's the Messiah? No one asked the question for that. So just the fact that people do miracles and they are incredible doesn't seem to get the reaction that this miracle gets. And so we have to ask the question, why does the crowd react to this miracle and to others in the life of Christ differently than all the other miracles? And that's because the miracles, these three, which are called the Messianic miracles, these three are unique in Jewish history. All the other ones have some sort of a uniqueness. For instance, Christ raises people from the dead, Lazarus from the dead. But guess what? In the Old Testament, guess who raises people from the dead? Elijah. I mean, is it uncommon for someone to be raised from the dead? Sure, but it's not unique. So when Christ does it, he might be a prophet. He might be someone that's really special. But we had other people that we haven't claimed to be the Messiah also do things that are similar. What he is going to do here is Christ is going to provide his calling card that says, I am the Messiah. This is a unique miracle that has not been done before. Therefore, I am the Messiah. Does that all make sense? This is what I've been leading up to with this leprosy thing the whole night is to try to get to this particular point so that you understand what the reaction is of the crowd. And we understand next week part of what the issue is going to be with the healing of the lame man, right? All right. Okay. I gotta get going before I get off on a tangent over here. All right. Okay. So the biblical evidence points to the fact that there are three miracles Christ does that are unique within Jewish history, which when we get to each one of them, you'll see the reaction of the people. And it's going to be a significant reaction. Now, Fruchtenbaum, he labels them the three messianic miracles, but they're miracles that only God could do or that the Messiah could do, but no one else can perform these miracles. And we'll explain why when we get to each one of the three. I'm only going to explain the leprosy one tonight, but we'll explain the other ones. Now, those three miracles in the life of Christ that uniquely point to him, that's his calling card as the Messiah, that are unique to Jewish history, would be the healing of the Jewish leper, right? The casting out of a dumb demon. In fact, it's the casting out of the dumb demon that actually causes his rejection by the leadership of Israel and the Jewish people. And it causes, as a result, the unpardonable sin. Because this is a messianic miracle, and their response should have been, he's the Messiah, but that's not the response they give, right? So the casting out of a dumb demon, and then the healing of a man born blind, right? These are all three miracles that would be unique and that would point to Christ being the Messiah. Do you have a question, Rich? Oh, okay. Okay. Just stretching. All right. Okay. So as we think about the types of miracles that Christ does, two types of miracles. One of them is, I'll just call it the garden variety general one. I mean, raising people from the dead, walking on water, like creating bread and fish out of the thin air. Like those are your garden variety types of things, right? You know, those would be like, they're definitely pointing to him as the Messiah. They're definitely pointing to the fact that this person has the authority to do all these things, but they would not have been unique within history, right? And so we'll call them sort of non-messianic. And then there's these three that would be those messianic miracles, right? And these miracles would be particularly things that the rabbis taught are not something that can be done by anybody other than God or the Messiah, right? All right. So the healing of the Jewish leper should have caused people to ask, is this the promised Messiah? That is where we're at. Now, let's get to the actual episode. I'm sorry I took so long on the whole leprosy thing, but let's get to the episode now of Christ healing him with that as the background, right? So it says, while he was in one of the cities, there was a man full of leprosy, and when he saw Jesus, he fell on his face and begged him, Lord, if you will, you can make me clean. Now remember, he's in his last stages of the disease, near death, right? And I just think about bullet point number 2 just for a second. Think of the level of faith. There are certain people in the life of that we encounter in the ministry of Christ that exhibit faith that is almost unbelievable. The nobleman, when Christ heals his son from a distance. This person, why? Because they've been taught there is no cure for leprosy. There's no way that you can be healed, but yet still the man hears that Christ has been doing all these healings. Not leprosy, but this guy says, look, I know I've been told my entire life there is no way anyone can heal me from this, but yet I know this man can do it. Because notice he comes to him and he doesn't say, if you can heal me, please do so. He says, if you will. In other words, he comes in full faith to Christ, knowing Christ can do the impossible. And that's what this is, the impossible, right? And he says, I know that you can make me clean. In other words, not just heal my physical ailments, but remove the uncleanness that is part of the disease, right? That's not just the physical nature.
So he would have heard of Jesus' renown for doing miracles.
Yeah, and remember, up to this time, we've talked about the fact that Christ is gone. In fact, there were so many crowds around him, he had to get in the boat last week, right? And so it said his fame spread all the way from Syria, all the way into the Decapolis, all the way into Jerusalem, Judea, right, and to the west side of the Jordan. That's what it said last time. So Christ's fame has spread because of all these healings and all the demons that he has cast out. So yes, somehow this information has trickled down to this leper or this leper colony, and he believes it. We've got a person in our midst that I know for a fact can heal me. There's no doubt in his mind that Christ can do it. It's only a matter if Christ, do you will to do it? Do you want to do it? I believe you can do it, right? So again, notice the fact that he asked him to make me clean. He doesn't say, if you will, you can heal me, because this man is suffering from more than just physical ailment. He is suffering from uncleanness that comes from his physical ailment. If you can heal me, which will then result in me being clean. And when I am clean, not only will I have a restored physical body, but I will have restored relationships with society and with God. Right? So there's much more theologically packed into his ask for Christ to make him clean and not just to heal him. And he recognizes that that is the full impact of Christ's cleanliness. Now, if we just kind of apply that to ourselves, when Christ comes into our life, he brings that cleansing to us, right? And there's going to be an ultimate healing that will result in the ultimate healing of our body we talked about last week with the glorification of the body, that also coincides with the cleansing of us where we're made clean. And so we get this picture of what it means to be healed physically, as well as being cleansed, to be brought into right relationship with others and God, right? In this example. All right. Okay, so
was his being healed of leprosy like salvation for him?
well, I would say so. His healing was physical, and his cleansing allowed him to participate back in society. But here's the thing. It's his faith in Christ that leads to his salvation, right? So remember, at this time, Christ hasn't died. So the leper doesn't have to believe that Christ has died on the cross and is resurrected from the dead. All he has to do is put his faith in trust in who Christ is in his person. I know you can do it. I believe in you. So yes, does he get physically healed? Yes, but this guy also experiences spiritual salvation. So I expect to see this leper in heaven and to talk to him about the situation, what that felt like to encounter Christ, right? So we have the motivation for this healing for Christ. Like I said, Christ does not do what society says. Christ says, I love you and I have compassion on you, even though society has spit you out and doesn't want, it's considered you dead. They don't just want to have nothing to do with you. You're dead to society. And yet Christ has compassion, full of deep pity. And that's the motivation for Christ performing the healing. Now, here's the important thing. All three gospel accounts mention that Christ reached out and touched him. Now that should strike you as being absolutely incredible. Because for Christ to reach out and touch him would have been, like if I reached out and touched a leper, that would make me unclean, right? And we know already from the account of the nobleman's son that Christ didn't have to touch anybody. He could heal from a distance. So he could have been looking at the leper and said, yeah, be clean. He didn't have to interact with them. He didn't have to have physical touch. The first physical touch, other than perhaps from another leper, that this man experienced in probably over 10 years of his life was from what? The Savior. That human touch, that connection that says, I love you, comes from the Savior who says, I love you, be clean, right? And it's this, don't miss the act of compassion and love that's demonstrated here by the physical reaching out and touching of this man who's not been touched and doesn't feel worthy, right? So this touch, he touches the untouchable, he cures the incurable. And what we can kind of see from this is because Christ is God and he is the source of cleansing, the source of removing the defilement. He can touch the man without being unclean because he brings cleansing, right? And reaches out and touches this gentleman. All right. So he says, and immediately it says that Christ reached out and touched him, and he said, I will be clean. That's what Christ said. Hey, I will, mean I'm willing to do it, as you've asked, be clean, right? And it says, immediately the leprosy left him. Now, if you know anything about leprosy, by this time, this guy probably doesn't have any fingers, toes. He probably doesn't have a nose anymore, right? His face is completely disfigured and marred. Parts of his body, his flesh, he probably doesn't look, he looks more like a zombie, if you know what I'm saying, than he does a human. And immediately he's restored. He's a person again. He's recognizable as a human, as a person, because of the touch of Christ. And it says here, that that immediately left him and he was made clean. And then it says, and Jesus sternly charged him and sent him away at once and said to him, see that you say nothing to anyone, but go show yourself to the priest and offer for your cleansing what Moses commanded for a proof to them. All right, so first of all, Jesus, it says, sternly charged him and sent him away at once. Now, the Greek is more emphatic. Like he forcefully sent him away, like go is his command. And don't talk to anybody, but go show yourself to the priest. Like sternly charged him. Like this wasn't just, hey, go and show yourself. Like, do not talk to anybody until you have shown yourself to the priest and leave now. In other words, there's an immediacy in the Greek language that says, do it right now. Don't wait. Go, right? And the reason for that command is that according to the Mosaic law, it wasn't over for the man until he showed himself to the priest and the priest could confirm the leprosy had left. So he isn't cleansed from a societal perspective until that is confirmed by the priest, right? That's right. He had to be designated as clean because the rabbis had declared him to be unclean and a leper. And so in the temple documents, that's right. Jesus says, I know you're physically clean, but in order for you to be able to participate in the temple and everything else, or in order for society to accept you back, you need to go do this. Show yourself to the priest. And then now we go back to Leviticus chapters 13 and 14, where now the priests are going to be like, oh, what do we do? And now they've got to follow the procedure to determine and say that he was clean. Now, it says that he's to show himself to the priest and offer the cleansing that Moses commanded him for proof to them. Who's the them? The priest. Okay. Now, it says here in Mark, I'm reading here from Darrell Bach. It says, in Mark, the account precedes a series of 5 controversies and suggests that this miracle was a key one in getting the attention of leadership to what Jesus was doing. This is one of the first major things in the life of Christ that will grab the attention. And here's the reason why. When you go show yourself to the priest and the priest confirms that this leper has been healed, no one's been healed in 1,500 years. If you want a billboard, if Christ wants to put up a billboard that says, hey, guess what, I've arrived, he just put up the billboard. Like, He's right in the sky with the airplane right here that I have arrived and I am the Messiah. This is the attention getter that the leadership needs to pay attention to. All right. Yeah. Now, Fruchtenbaum says the same type of thing. He says Yeshua, that's Jesus, deliberately sent this cleansed leper to the priesthood in order to get the leaders to investigate his ministry and his message. This would force them to make a decision regarding his person, that he was the Messiah, and his message that he was offering to Israel the kingdom predicted by the Jewish prophets, right? Now, when Jesus says that it's to show a proof for them, a proof could be positive or could be negative, right? So it says here that, in the negative sense, it could be in a positive way, it could be to convince them. Hey, show us some positive evidence to convince them. But in a negative sense, it would be used as evidence against them that you don't believe that he's the Messiah, and here's the evidence that goes against you. And so if you continue to not believe he's the Messiah, this evidence will be used against you. Does that make sense? So it's used in a negative sense. And I believe that the negative sense is preferred because the priests are part of what religious group? Sadducees. Thank you, Rich. You've been listening. The Sadducees. Remember, up till this point, the Pharisees probably are kind of ambivalent. They're probably getting concerned about Christ, but they haven't openly opposed him yet. But guess who's openly opposed him? The Sadducees. And why did they oppose him? Well, the reason why they opposed him because he chased out the money changers. The Sadducees, remember, ran the big money changing thing. And at the Passover, Christ chases out all the stuff and turns over the tables. They're mad at him. In fact, he's going to do it again, and that's what's going to lead to his death, right? And so this group, the priests come from that Sadducean line. This group now, Christ says, this leper now, go to them. These people that already hate me and already want to oppose me, go to them as proof that I am the Messiah. And that what I said and what I did, because remember when he overchanges when he threw over the tables and stuff like that, they said, by what authority do you do this? Jesus is sending the leper back to say, this is the authority that I did it by. I'm the Messiah. You want to know what authority? I just gave you proof of my authority to do what I did in the temple, right? So that's where this show yourself as a proof to them, I think, should be taken in the negative. All right. Gosh, I gotta go here. Otherwise, we won't get done tonight. All right. He's to show himself to the priest. It says, here's what would happen. When the leper would present himself to the priest, there are kind of several things that would happen. First of all, the priest would have to offer 2 birds as a sacrifice. And then for 7 days, they would investigate the situation and they would ask 3 questions. Had he really been a leper? Well, that's easy to answer because remember, to be declared a leper was a matter of documentation in the temple. All they had to go was look at their records and say, yep, Joe Smith, yep, we declared him a leper 10 years ago on this day, right? So that's easy. The second one was he healed of this disease. Well, the 7 days was for them to investigate him. So over the 7 days, if it proved that in fact the signs of leprosy were gone, that would demonstrate that in fact he had been healed. And then the third question was, what were the circumstances concerning the healing? How did it happen? Well, this man, he's not ashamed of Jesus at all. He tells everybody, and he's telling the priest, guess what? Jesus of Nazareth, this guy that you've been hearing about, he's the one that did it. So they now know who has done this. And then finally, on the 8th day, if in fact all signs of leprosy were gone, 2 male lambs were offered, and a ewe lamb, flour, and oil were offered, symbolizing that the person had been cleansed and that now they could be part of community, and they would then be designated as free from leprosy. All right. Okay. Let me see here. Let me just get to this next part here because we're running late. Okay. So it says here, but he went out and began to talk freely about it and spread the news so that Jesus could no longer openly enter town, but was out in desolate places, and people were coming to him from every quarter. So the result of the healing was this. The man, despite what Christ commanded him to do, just blabs it all over the place. He cannot contain himself. This is the result of being impacted by Christ. Even when the Savior tells you not to do it, You cannot help it, right? So the question is, are we telling people about Christ? And if we're not, it's because we maybe haven't been impacted. Or we forgot about the time when we were impacted by Christ and changed, right? So he goes out, spreads the news. And because of that, the teaching ministry that Jesus has in the synagogues has to end because he can't go to any towns anymore. The crowds are so great. If he tries to enter a town, they're just going to throng him. So what does he do? He can't enter towns. He goes out into this remote area, but that still doesn't stop them. They find him. Even when he goes out into the desert and the hills, they still find him because they want what Christ has to offer. Okay, now the last thing here says the deliverance Jesus brought transcended the Mosaic law and its regulations. Though the law provided for a ritual purification of a leper, it was powerless to cleanse a person from the disease or to effect inward spiritual renewal. That is what Christ accomplished. Healing of the man, restoration of his relationship to society, and ultimately, his spiritual redemption because the man expressed faith in who Christ was. Okay? All right, I'm going to stop and ask if there are any questions or comments. He healed the man, restored his relationships to society, and restored his relationship to God because the man expressed faith in Christ. So he's saved, he's physically healed, and he's able to interact now with society. So this man has literally been brought from death to life. All right, any questions or comments before we end? I apologize, we went a little over tonight, but any questions or comments? Online as well. Anyone online? Any questions? Okay. So with that said, I want you to read the next account that comes up, and that's about the healing of the man that's lame and has to be lowered down through the roof of the house. Remember that one? So this situation ties into the next one. Christ has just sent his calling card and announced who he is, and it's undeniable to both the Sadducees and the Pharisees. Now they got to do something with it. And we're going to see what their attitude towards Christ is in the next episode that we have. All right? So that'll be for next week. So with that said, anyone want to close in prayer? All right. Thank you, Rich. Here.
Father, this is been another amazing evening together to learn more about our Savior, the Lord Jesus Christ. And what really sticks with me, God, is just the compassion that God shows, that Jesus showed toward this leper that seems so much like people that we can encounter day to day, that we would choose to ignore and abandon, that need to be loved, need to be seen, that need to be touched, that need to be healed. And there's so many that we know who need healing, need restoration to society and to you, God. And I just think right now of not just my son, but others that we all know that would fit that category, and that we would never forget that we were once like that leper that was separated from you, dead in our sin, but you restored us by calling our name, by calling us to salvation. So, Father, thank you very much. Thank you from the bottom of our hearts for how you love us, for your Son, for salvation, for freedom and life in Jesus Christ. And in his name we pray. Amen.
Amen. Amen. Thank you. All right. We will see you all next week. Thank you, everyone online.